Hello, I'm Cameron Vanloo. I'm from Staffordshire University. The lighting hasn't changed. I'm just that sunburn. I do apologise in advance. But today I wanted to talk about physical activity and the esports curricula. So one of the things that I realised quite heavily I've been teaching esports for the last 5 years. God, this mic is really uncomfortable this way. I can see why you told me to change it, but I'm not going to because I've started off with it, was the fact that the people who are involved in esports is drastically changing. In the last 5 years, the normality of what is seen as an esports athlete or an esports player has drastically changed from when I worked in the competitive scene. And what I realized with this was the fact that our curricula is always changing, it's always adapting, but one of the things it isn't adapting to is the fact that esports athletes are now seeing themselves more as sports athletes. So how do we adopt that within our curricular design? So I looked at a few different things in terms of this. There's two videos there. I'm not going to put them up. The first one was the 1960s. It was JFK's initiative around sport in American high schools, and this initiative that they were being able to push people to the absolute limits, and that people were coming out healthier, more controlled, and more disciplined because of it. It was very much to do with the army, as like everything in America seems to be. But for the most part, it was a really, really clever initiative that produced a lot of self-confidence within men in particular. And it really helped in terms of mental strain, a lot of PTSD, and a lot of people who had lost family members during Vietnam. So this was something that came out of that. And I was looking at it, and I was looking at how our education system sort of shifted and changed during that in the last 10, 15 years, and how much focus we put on academic success over everything, especially within the UK. And I realized that stress was causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of obesity, which was a cone factor. And we were realizing that education of activity and how we learn has drastically shifted. And that's not always been for the best. Progression is not always good in terms of it, especially when we are missing out on core fundamental parts. The next part is the spikeball G2 video in terms of if any of you've ever played spikeball or you know what spikeball is. Does anyone know what spikeball is? It's like a little yeah, go look at the video for G2. It's like a little trampoline, and there's a ball, and you whack it between your teammates, etc. It's about reducing communication. It's a very, very combined sport, which is very common between what's the not hippies? What's the other one? But it's a certain group of people that I forgot the name of, but it seems to be something they really enjoy. It's quite common with extreme sports athletes as well, but the idea behind it is to improve communication and also try and take athletes out of their common situations. So why am I looking at this? Well, my research focuses on three different key fundamental areas. The first one is about physical activity within education, the esports curriculum, what I'm going to be talking about today. But the next one is about addressing inclusivity challenges to disability gamers. One of the things that has been a common talk between everyone who's gone before me already is about ASD, autism spectrum disorder, a condition that I have myself. And one of the things that I realized with autism spectrum disorder is there's a really bad and unhealthy relationship with food and exercise. You either over-exercise or under-exercise. And one of the core fundamental processes that I find out within esports participants and within our student body at Staffordshire University is that 85% of my students have ASD. Out of 200 students, 85% of students, which is the highest number of any of our programs, apart from our games design program, which also has a high percentage, but they've got like 3,000 of those. So it was important that I looked at it from a comparative standpoint that, well, these people do not like exercise because they don't think they're very good at it, but they love esports because they think they're really, really good at it. And my students are great. Most of them end up going to scholarships in North America. Thank you, by the way, guys, for taking all of them. And then my PhD is looking at physical exercise and training within amateur competitive gamers. And when I say amateur competitive gamers, I'm not talking about Joe Bloggs down the street who's bronze in League of Legends. I'm talking about amateur players who are in Diamond, Masters, etc., who aren't on full-time contracts. I think people don't always understand the aspect of what a amateur player is in esports because there's no comparison within traditional sport. If you're in the top 1% of a sport, if you're top 1% of football players, you're playing professionally. In esports, that's not the case. So it was about trying to make sure that we understood the competitive aspects behind that. So a few things I want to go over today, I'm only doing this because Denik isn't here, because Denik is my colleague at Charles University. He's a bit of a scary man. He's about the same size. He's like 6'3", and he's an MMA fighter. So if he was here, he would talk about this bit instead of me. But I want to look at the psychological and sociological benefits of exercise and how we can adopt that within the curricula and how we can go back to the idea that we can teach whilst exercising. One of the interesting things at Staffordshire University is we have open plan teaching. This is the third lecture theatre I've ever taught in. We don't have lecture theatres. It's really bizarre, but if I can teach there, why am I not teaching in the field whilst we're learning something else? And that was the first thing that I realized. One of the things I learned from my sort of starting point was, where could I teach? Because as a lecturer, I can teach anywhere. My first ever lecture of analytics, I taught the top of Greenwich Mean Time. I talked about the value in terms of time and why can't I teach people outdoors and how could I make their experience as a learning experience as enriching as possible. So I want to look about the psychological and sociological impacts. The next one was looking at the case study of the G Sports League, as well as sports days and how we integrate sports days within our curricula. This was quite interesting for me because I come from a sporting background. I used to play competitive rugby, and that comes with its own long connotations, including a broken back and playing wheelchair basketball as well at a later date. And one of the things that I realized was, although my students may absolutely suck at sport, and they do suck at sport, but they're fantastic at esports, it gave them a playing field that they could actually understand how I wanted to teach them so they could actually adopt it within their team environments. And then we looked at exercise and the curriculum and how that came to be and some of the recommendations that I've put forward to my department, to my faculty, as well as my university as a whole within other subjects, because this is not just in esports, this is across multiple subjects. An interesting thing about Staffordshire University, we were the first UK university to have an esports designated undergraduate, and we're in the 6th year now of that. We've had students who've gone to work for Alpine, Red Bull, etc. And we have a very, very high employment rate, which means that we have, at our graduate success outcomes, we have 92% working in graduate level jobs, which is the highest of any course at our university. So how do we do that? So there's a few things that went through in terms of this was the actual psychological and sociological aspects of it. Education at the root cause, even if in the UK we have paid tuition fees, and I don't particularly like it, I don't think anyone does, is about fun. I think a lot of the time we forget how education is meant to inspire us to think about things. The years at university are meant to be the funnest times of your life, and how do we adopt that? So, well, let's find different ways to teach people. So the psychological and sociological benefits of exercise were the most important things. We have students who struggle with severe anxiety, extreme depression, and a range of other sociological and psychological based conditioning that they have been used to. This year will be the last year that I'm teaching COVID students who started at university, and that had a direct impact. Have you ever tried to teach, I'm assuming that most of you now have tried to teach an ASD student who's been stuck in COVID for 3 years. They don't know how to deal or interact with other people. It's the most stressful experience of my life. And one of the things that we learned from that was, well, we can improve this by adopting exercise and making sure that everyone feels comfortable about making themselves look like a tit. So the one thing that I don't have a photo of, because one of my level 6 students who took these, my final year students, was kind enough not to take a photo of me playing football in a T-Rex suit. But there's somewhere in one of these I have a T-Rex suit on to make it a bit more even as a playing field. So it was about enjoying and building up that cognitive development. The other aspect that we use in terms of all of our classes, we always start our classes off with a warm-up in terms of training. And when students are asking questions, they have to improvise in terms of how they go about it. There's always a new way to learn and a new way to develop. One of the interesting things about our university as well is if a student finds a better way of doing their assignment than what is expected, so if I have a talk about global esports, for example, and we've got a 2,000-word essay. A student can, if they can find a better way of doing that, if that could be a video, presentation, dynamic dancing. I'm not going to suggest dynamic dancing on global, but they can do that as their option instead. There's no set format behind it. And then we looked at it in terms of my teams and my performance teams behind it. And we looked at increased self-esteem, which was they were able to deal with failure more. One of the commonalities within esports a lot of the time is failure leads to toxicity, and toxicity leads to disengagement with the curricula. So the way that we did it was to make sure that they realize how to deal with failure and to overcome that, because in an environment where you're playing someone face to face, you understand sportsmanship a lot more. My favorite tagline ever is GG easy. It wasn't easy if it's taken 45 minutes, has it? But, you know, it happens. And then we think about this in terms of better sleep. And then we think about this in terms of when you've got better sleep, your brain can develop in terms of cognitive behavior a lot more, which allows us to understand and deliberate things on a larger scale. And when we think about this in terms of physiological aspects, and one of the big issues that we have within esports students in particular is their sociological placing. They don't have that place a lot of the time. If you've got ASD, social situations are very daunting and very, very difficult. And we wanted to make sure that their social interactions were able to mirror that and to find themselves being able to cope with situations outside their norms. And being outside your norm is something that parents don't always understand. So a lot of our students have parachute parents, and that comes with its own issues. But one of the things we want to make sure was social interactions were the forefront of everything that we do. Our soft skill development is vital because our soft skills are what actually land students' jobs. Community engagement was also a factor. In Staffordshire, we have a football team called Stoke City Football Club, and they have our community forum, and they are supporting us in terms of that. So we have our football teams competing with our esports teams across 2 different days. One's in Valorant, where we win 13-0, and then we have a game of football where we lose 13-0. So it works out to be a draw on most examples. And then we think about this in terms of reduced social isolation, creating a better community as a whole university, but also in relation to other universities with the G Sports League. And then we think about this in terms of shared goals and achievements. And coming from a sports background, a lot of esports that I came into coaching 8 years ago was the fact that I wanted them to understand how sports competitive advantages come and develop through that. So a few bits around the case study. Tobias actually has really highlighted that I'm going to go over time, so I'm going to try to keep it very short, this bit, is that G-Sport is a case study that we use in relation to how exercise can be valued alongside gaming itself and to be a measure to compete alongside that. So the G-Sports League has 8 countries. I think it's gone up since the last time I did this, which I think is now 12, across the whole of Europe that compete on a week-by-week basis in CS, FIFA, well, it's EAFC now, but we're going to call it FIFA because I can't be bothered to change it like I can't be bothered to change X, and calorie deficit. So they have to have a calorie deficit based on their body mass composition. And this is played across weeks on end on challenger mode. And then they have a live final. There's a lovely video that if you want to watch it at any point, I'm very happy to send it to you. And it was something that was set up by Charles University and Staffordshire University 3 years ago, with Charles University taking the lead on it from their sports department. And they don't have an esports degree, but they do all of it through their sports department and the value that comes with it. And then in relation to what I've been doing more locally and how I went about it was, well, my students always tell me that, Cameron, I really want you to play rugby against us because that was like the only thing you're actually any good at. And I went, okay, we'll do a sports day then. So we had 75 sign up, which is 36% of our course cohort. It's our biggest event of the year. It was on a pitch on a Sunday morning in the rain because the whole of Stoke is always raining. To show you that it's a desire to have exercise in their curriculum and they're willing to come on a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. Trying to get students to get out of bed at 9 o'clock in the morning is quite an achievement behind it. So having that as the involvement of why exercise is also important. So what did I take into consideration with this? Well, how do we start allowing that to be accredited in terms of students understanding that value to those students? Because the ASD aspect of most of our students, having that social communication, is so much more vital than me telling them to learn German, no offense. But we have to take a modern language. So it's one of those things in terms of it. We also have Latin, so I should have used Latin as the example. I can't offend anyone with Latin. So it's how do we start accrediting those? And well, there was a few things that I thought about in terms of how we can start accrediting them, which was cross-disciplinary collaboration. So this was working with our sports department in a lot more cohesive sort of sense. We looked at in terms of curriculum expansion, so we were looking at it in relation to coaching-based modules and how that interaction with both our sports department and our esports department come together, because they are struggling in relation to digital learning and literacy within their department, and we're struggling with the fact that I haven't got any sports psychologists. So that was how we sort of built it together. The next one was in terms of practical applications in relation to gaining students to build up boot camps and developing of boot camps in terms of social society. And then we started thinking about the holistic approach. And with esports players and athletes, and the way that we go about it is all about making sure that person comes out of university in a better state than they came into university. We're a widening participation university, which in short means we're not a Russell Group university in the UK, and our job is to make sure that our local community benefits from it. Stoke is the poorest county, Staffordshire is the poorest county in the whole of the UK, outside of my home county, which is Gwent. So it's something that we have to make sure is a big focus within our curriculum. So thank you, these are my amazing students. If you're looking for any American students, all of these players are top 500 in their games, by the way. So yeah, and then you can find me on any of those. Any questions?